How's it going, everybody? It's Razine here for Astrophotography. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to edit nebulae photo with Affinity Photo, namely NGC 7000 and North America Nebula in this case. This image was shot with a 183 sensor dedicated cooled color astronomy camera, the Skywatcher 72 or 80 ED Pro refracting telescope, and an L Pro filter in the imaging train. There is a link to download this stacked TIFF in the description below if you want to get that and follow along with this tutorial. Otherwise, if you just want to sit and watch and learn, let's go on with it. Let's get into Affinity and let's go on with it. So the first thing I want to point out with my Affinity is my layout. I've laid this out because it's reminiscent to me of Photoshop, which is something I'm quite familiar with. So for this tutorial, you're going to need the info panel, the histogram. History is always useful, and layers. Now, if you can't see these, you probably won't have info on show. Go to View, Art and Studio, and then tick the ones that you want. So once you've done that, what we're now going to do is I'm going to resize this image just to take some strain off my laptop for the sake of tutorial. You don't have to do this, but if you want to know how to resize an image, well, we go to Document. We go to Resize Document. I'm going to change it to 100 dpi just to keep a bit of resolution. And then probably 2500 to keep that 3:2 aspect ratio. Make sure this padlock is locked. And we're going to click Resize. Right, we're almost ready to begin now. Almost, because we have to do what's called a threshold adjustment layer. I use this so I can find the brightest and the darkest point of my image. This helps me with color balancing, making sure no data is clipped, making sure stars aren't bloating out because I'm clipping data, for example. To do that, make sure your background level is selected. Go to this semicircle half moon here, the adjustment tab, click that, and add a threshold adjustment layer. Now, this represents the histogram, same up here. All the data is on the left-hand side, which is the darks of the image. The right-hand side, like the left, is the darks, blacks, shadows, midtones, highlights, whites, etc. What we want to do, we need to pull this data up, but first, we're going to use this gray point slider. We're going to move it down in the thresholds. And as we do this, we're going to see more stars appearing. Now, don't get too excited. This isn't actually editing anything yet. I'm going to put the threshold to 1% with this image because a dark image like this is very typical of a dedicated astronomy camera. If you are using a DSLR, chances are you will see some nebula already there. And I will point out what the threshold would look like for you in a couple of steps time. But we're going to go to the 1% threshold like that, the 1%, and I'm just going to close it. This is what we need. So what we're looking at here is naturally all the bright points are stars and the black area are the background sky. To make a sampling, go to the Info tab. First of all, we're going to need to click this triple stack and add a new sampler. We're going to use one as our white point and one as our black point. So I'm going to use the top one as my white point. And I'm going to pick this star here. I'm going to click this sample from location, click, hold, and drag it over to this star. And just put it dead in the middle as you can. Don't get too hung up on this. We're going to refine it in a moment, and then we're going to refine it further later anyway. Next up, pick a black point in the sky, and do the same with the black point sampling tool. So click, hold, drag it to the sky. And now we can just delete this threshold adjustment layer. And we're now ready to start actually making some adjustments to the image. So as I mentioned already, all the data is on the left-hand side, and we need to stretch this data. This basically means amplifying the signal, dragging that data up from the blacks through the darks into the midtones so we can actually see it and we can appreciate the image. I'm going to use a combination of levels and curves. Normally I just use curves, but you know, you can work with them together. So let's start with levels. Make sure our background is selected and go to the Adjustments tab, click it and add levels. We use adjustment layers because we can always double click them and go back and edit them. So if I just do this and close it, I can now just double click the thumbnail and I'm right back into the adjustment layer. Right, so black points, white point. Open your Info tab. We're going to need to pay attention to these numbers here. Click and pull the white level down and down and down and down and down and down. And look, there we go. We've got some stars showing now, yeah? You can see these stars. Excellent. But first of all, pay attention here. Can you see that these are all 255? The information here goes from 0, which is black, to 255, which is white. And if you clip either of those, you are losing data, you're losing color, and all things that you might actually, that you're going to want in your image. One way you can think of it is the dynamic range, the difference between the darkest darks and the whitest whites. So we've clipped the data here. So what we want to do is click our white level and pull it back a bit to, say, about 15%. Like we've got 206 on the red channel, 110, 140. This is good. Nothing is now clipped. I'm going to close that. And now to make a more refined stretch, I'm going to use curves. Curves are a lot more accurate. So we're going to go here and make a curve adjustment layer. And here it is. Again, like always, histogram on the left is darks, right is the whites, and these are your brightness and everything in between. We're going to click the line. We're going to pull it this way. This is what's known as an astro curve. Now we're clipping the red channel again because we've hit the roof here. Click here and we're going to just flatten this down. So just like that. So in 2 adjustments, we've gone from nothing to a bit of star to more stars. You can make another curves adjustment, which I think I will do on this. So again, curves adjustment. And this one is not going to be nearly as aggressive. Again, like that. And then flatten that down. And there we go. If we zoom in, you can just about start seeing the nebulosity appear. I now want to make a layer out of all these adjustments and have another layer to work from. So I'm going to go up to the layer button and click merge visible, which is also Control Alt Shift plus E. And now we have a layer that has all those adjustments baked into it. I'm going to delete these just to take some strain off my laptop. You might be able to hear it ramping up now, the fan's going. I'm going to call that initial adjustments. I'd probably leave it there if I was doing it normally. I wouldn't delete them. Oh, this guy's clearing up. Anyway, I think we can get away with one more curve stretch. You're going to notice curves are used a lot, especially in my editing workflow. Yeah, just a very minor curve stretch. I'm just going to right click this. I'm just going to merge this down. Now I'm going to draw your attention to this. If we look in the corners here, can you see these dark patches up in these corners? And then just empty bits here on the bottom. These are stacking artifacts. So this is what's left over from when the image was stacked, especially because these images were dithered, which means the telescope moved slightly in between every exposure. We don't want these. It's going to mess up our histogram. It doesn't look good either. So we're going to crop them out. Let's go over to the left, press the crop tool. And I'm going to change the mode to original ratio. This is going to keep it at the 3:2. If you want to change it to like a 16:9 for a wallpaper, or an 8:10, or a 6:4 for prints, you can just type it up here. So if I wanted a 8:10, I'd type 8 there and 10 there. What I'm going to do is keep it at original ratio. This keeps the 3:2 ratio. I'm just going to zoom in up here, and I'm going to pull this in a bit. See how it's keeping this ratio? Pull that in. I'm going to go to the bottom right corner and pull that in as well. I'm going to zoom back out and press apply. So now we've cropped the image, we've sliced all that nasty stuff off the tops and the sides. We've just got good data to work with now. Bit of housekeeping to do. You might notice that our sampling points have now moved. And also I'm going to redo the threshold adjustment layer. So if you're a DSLR user and I mentioned about, you might see some more data already. This is for you. So we're just going to go back to adjustments. We're going to make another threshold adjustment layer. And here is our data. As we move our gray point down, look at that, more detail is shown, more stars are coming up, and then here comes the nebulosity. So what you want to do is move it up until everything whites out and then back it off a bit. So something like this is great. All this white point is nebulosity, dust, stars, things that we don't want our black point sampler on, because it's going to give us a weird tint to our image and the color balance is going to be off. So using this information, down here looks good, and around here looks good. Down here looks really bad. I mean, I'm just going to double click this. I'm going to move this down to like 15% maybe. Yeah, this is cleaner. This is a bit messy sometimes. I'm going to move my black point sampler into this area here. So I'm just going to go again with the info panel open, click, hold, and just drag that down there. And as we notice, this star's jumped off. I'm just going to delete this threshold layer and then click our white point sample location, click, drag, click and hold, and then drag it on there. So if you had DSLR data, that's probably what you would have seen. And originally we had our black point up there, which turned out there was nebulosity there. If we kept that then and color balanced to that, we would have had a weird color tint because it would have been using red, for example, and not a neutral black or the dark sky. Moving it down here is a cleaner patch of sky to sample from. Speaking of color balancing, that's what we're going to do next. So color balancing is taking these values here in the white and the black points, and we're going to even them out to some predetermined figure. So we're going to use a levels adjustment for this. We're going to go to our adjustment layers and use levels. And instead of adjusting the master tab, we're going to click it and we're going to adjust channels by channel, RG and MB. Normally you'd pick like an arbitrary figure. I got taught 248, and I'm sure there's a mathematical reason behind that, but I don't know. It's an arbitrary number to me, but I'm going to balance to 248 on the white channel and probably 30 in the black channel. You'll get a feel for what you like yourself when you start developing your own style. For example, if you don't like a really dark sky, then you would have your black points a bit higher, like 50, for example. So since I don't need to adjust the red, whites, I'm going to go to the green. And you can do the black and the white levels in one level adjustment, but for the sake of tutorial and to keep it clean, I'm going to show you one by one. Okay, so we're adjusting the white point balance. Red is good at 248, so I'm going to go to green. 226. So we're going to get the white level, and we're going to bump the white level up of the green channel. There you go, up to 248. Now we need to do the same for the blue channel, which is at 236. So again, grab the white point and pull it up, just like that. I'm going to call that one white point balance. And like I said, for the sake of the tutorial, I'm going to make a second level adjustment, which I'll call black point balance. Our black point, I said I wanted about 30. So I'm going to go into my red channel and move my black level down to about 30. I'm not going to fuss too much about it. I don't want to waste too much time on this, but you can spend as much time as you want getting it as accurate as you can. Okay, so red is at 31. I'm going to go to the green channel. Green channel down to 31. And then the blue channel. Okay. Layer. Merge visible. Going to call this layer color balanced. And now I'm probably going to do a couple more curve stretches here because I need to bring the data back up. I still can't see the nebulosity and I need to increase contrast. So adjustment curves on the color balance layer. Can't see anything on the histogram. Has the histogram broken on me? Nope. So I'm going to again just pull this up. Pull, 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 pull. We're at 252. 253 on the whites. I'm going to leave it there. We can now finally see some nebulosity appearing. And I'm going to now do a contrast curve. This is otherwise known as the S curve. And what we're going to do, we're going to click a point on the left side of the spike. What this is going to do is going to start dragging the data across more of the histogram spectrum. We're going to pull this down just a bit. Then on the right hand side of it, we're going to pull this up. Up, 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 up. Now we're topping out at 255. Let's try and correct that. 254. I'm just going to move this very top one back down to 248. Some people say that can damage your dynamic range, but since we're using raw data, we can recoup that dynamic range a little bit during our editing. We've got a lot of information in our data. It was a high megapixel camera, so we have a lot of data to work with. So this was an Astro curve, and this was a contrast S curve. So the Astro curve brought the entire exposure up, and then we used the contrast curve to drop the background sky and to raise the nebulosity up. Going to make another duplicate of this, a layer, merge visible. And I'm going to call this first contrast. And like I said, to keep workload off my laptop and keep moving fast, I'm just deleting those. You should keep them, most likely. So we could do another contrast curve if we want. So another curve adjustment layer. Let's see what happens here. You can see how the spike is kind of jutted out, though we are clipping some data at the top there. Also, our color balance has kind of gone squiff. We can fix that in a moment. Let's try another contrast curve. Pull it down there. Pull it up there. Maybe I'll pull it up there. The more towards the right hand side you get, the more you only affect the brighter pixels in the image. So up here I'm really just affecting the highlights of the image. That's why the nebulosity isn't moving that much compared to down here. I'm going to leave it at that. See how we've brought this back up? Yeah, don't have to worry too much about moving that there. Cool. Right, see, let's look at the differences it's made. Washed out, we're developing contrast now. I'm just going to merge this down just through my own workflow. Normally, if I'm not filming a tutorial and putting extra demand on my laptop, I would leave everything as it is, leave it untouched. What I would do now is I'm going to adjust the background and the foreground individually to each other. So to do that, let's start with the background. I'm going to go to select sample color. I'm going to click the background sky here, and then I'm going to move the tolerance slider up and down. And this is what I love Affinity Photo for. Just this real-time feed is great. If you move the tolerance too high, you're going to select the nebulosity. If you don't have it high enough, you might not select enough of the sky. So I'm going to have a look. This looks about right. It's almost like the tide coming in, isn't it? About 7% looks right for me. It's not selecting the main nebulosity, and these bits around here, not too much to worry about because we're about to feather this selection. So I'm going to click apply, and then I'm going to go to select and feather. Feathering reduces the hard edges to things. It makes transitions smoother. It's how you can get like a really nice soft nebula bleeding into the background sky. The radius, we're just going to adjust that until the marching ants are only around the bits we want. I'm happy with this. So that's a radius of 28. I'm going to make that 30 for anyone who doesn't like non-whole numbers. I'm going to apply that to that selection. I'm going to use Control-C and Control-V to copy and paste that now. Or you could always go to Edit, Copy, and Paste. And now I'm going to press Control-D to deselect. Or you could go to Select. I'm going to call those isolated background edits because that's what they are. And the first thing I'm going to do is, let's have a look. We could probably do with a color balance. And it's a bit bright. Okay, so let's do the color balance first. It was a levels adjustment layer. Call that color balance. Before we proceed, I'm going to make it so these adjustments only affect this layer. And to do that, click it, pull it down until you see this line appear underneath isolated background. Drop it in there. Now, whatever we do here is only going to affect that background layer. Right. We want to do a color balance. Let's color balance everything to 64. So we're going to the red channel and move the black point up. So we hit 64. We don't need to do green. And then the same again for blue. 64. Excellent. Probably didn't make a perceivable difference. Oh, it did actually. If the image still looks generally a bit green, we can still fix that later on. If it has an overall green color cast, I'm going to wait until I'm affecting the master image again. Right, next. I want to do a curves adjustment now. So I'm going to click this adjustment layer and curves. And can you see how it's automatically just dropped itself into the group here, so to speak. And I'm just going to drag this down a bit. And if you want that transition to be a bit smoother, just make it a little bit of an S-curve. Okay. So this is what we started with. Balance the background a bit to remove some of the red tinge. Maybe we've introduced a bit of green. We can fix that. And then I dropped the color of the background sky a bit. Drop the brightness of it. I think this looks much nicer now. It's increased contrast. As you can see on the histogram now, the histogram is spreading out to cover more of the dynamic range. And next, I'm going to do some noise reduction on the background. Usually you can get away with a bit more noise reduction in the background because you're not generally got fine details you're trying to show off. With the background, isolated background edit selected, I'm going to go to filter, noise, and denoise. I'm going to pull this luminance down. It's probably remembered it from the last time I used this program. I'm going to press this button here for a mirrored view so we can see before and after. I'm going to pull the luminance slider up. Let's get that back down as well. That's defaults to 0. Okay, so with luminance, we're going to pull luminance up a bit. This is the actual noise reduction. And as you can see, it kind of blends everything out. That's generally why you lose detail, fine details. It makes everything a bit softer. 13%, probably 10% is more than enough for me. Noise reduction is a highly specific thing to the individual. You might want more noise reduction than me, and I might want more reduction than someone else. So just play with it and see what looks good for you. I'm going to also use a bit of color noise reduction, which generally helps with that like weird mottling that you get with noise. And I'm just going to apply that. Right. Before noise reduction, after noise reduction. That is everything that I want to do on the background. So I'm just going to collapse that group. And I'm going to go back to my first contrast group. And now I'm going to select the nebulosity. Same procedure. I'm going to go select the first contrast layer, go to select, sample color. I'm going to sample the main bulk of the reds. And I'm going to just change the tolerance slider accordingly. So I don't want any of that background sky. Something like that works for me, about 22%. And then I'm going to feather this selection. So select and feather. Let's see, a feather of about 20. Yeah. I'm going to apply that. Control C and Control V, copy and paste. Isolated foreground edits. And just deselect that. I'm mainly going to do curve adjustments, maybe a bit of color contrast, color balancing, sorry. Maybe the smallest bit of noise reduction. But let's see. First of all, let's make a curves adjustment layer. And again, we're going to click this. I'm going to drag it underneath this foreground layer edit here, so it falls into that collapsible group. And now these curves only affect the nebulosity. Let's raise this a bit. Yeah, kind of like that. I'm enjoying that. It's just a bit in the midtones. Maybe a bit just in the very top shadows. Maybe just a bit in the highlights. Nope. I prefer it down more towards the midtones. Just a general increase. Though this is obviously reducing contrast. I'm going to call that an astro curve or an astro curve. Astro curve. And now I want to bring some contrast back in, so I'm going to make another curves adjustment layer. But I want to just do a contrast curve. I'm going to pull this down towards the shadows area. And I'm going to raise it up in the highlights. Now I'm always a bit careful with these contrast ones because it introduces a lot of color. Yeah. I like that. It's added a good amount of contrast back into it. Maybe I'll raise it up a little bit so it's not as extreme. Yeah, that's all right for me. That's all right for me. And maybe I want to add a different hint to this. What's the color balance like? It's fine. So I just move this over and check the information panel here. It's all balanced. And this is where, if you want to get artistic, this is where you can kind of do this. So I might go into the blue, and maybe I want to introduce a bit of yellow into the highlights. So I'm going to pull the blue channel down here. Curves is like, do you know CMY? Cyan, magenta, yellow. It's the same as RGB, red, green, and blue. If you remove blue, you add yellow. So if I remove blue from the highlights, I'm adding yellow into the highlights. This is highly independent. This is now where like your own creativity starts coming into this. So yeah, that's all right. Let's try a general brightness and contrast edit on this now. So I went to adjustments, brightness, contrast. Let's increase the contrast. No, not really liking this. Just gonna delete that. Maybe another S curve. Look at the size of this data now. We're really getting somewhere with it. There's no such thing as a perfect histogram. It's going to be very dependent on the image. There's a very slight S curve. Just adds a little bit. And now I'm going to do a noise reduction. So I'm going to click my isolated foreground edits, filter, noise, denoise, before and after. So the before is on the right here. Let's remove all the noise reduction so I see what's going on. Now, if I crank this up high, you're going to see a lot of details just melt away. See how soft this has got now? So noise reduction is normally best kept a bit low. It's usually a good idea to just fight noise with integration time. I'm okay with, I'm probably going to do 8, to be honest. It's not much, just a hint of noise reduction and color noise reduction. Again, this is a highly personal preference. If you wanted more power to you, do more noise reduction if you so wish. I'm really liking the soft peach tones in this. It's an emission nebula, so normally it's quite red, but changing it to a more peachy color, I'm enjoying this. We're nearly done here, so I'm just going to collapse that. I'm done here, so I'm going to go to Layer and Merge Visible. So next, I can see a hot pixel here. If you've noticed that already, it's drawing you mad, then I'm sorry, I'm only just addressing it now. But we've got this blue streak here. And to fix that, I'm going to go over to here to the clone brush tool. I'm going to adjust the size of it. You can adjust the width up here, or you can use the square brackets on your keyboard. Hardness, I want it to be about 20%, so it has a nice soft edge to it. And then with the merged layer selected, I'm going to Alt click here in the sky, and then I'm just going to clone that out. Be careful not to clone out stars or any detail that you might want, if you can at all avoid it. Right. Now I'm going to do star reduction. So I'm actually going to call this layer Star Reduction Base. I'm going to right click this now. I'm now going to duplicate this and just call that Star Reduction. 2 layers means I can easily see before and after. With this, I'm going to go to Select, Sample Color, and I'm going to sample a star. I'm going to change my tolerance accordingly, so I can choose most of the star but no nebulosity. This image is quite a high tolerance actually. 44 works for me. If you want me to go into more depth, I do have a tutorial either coming up or published already, depending when you watch this video, that is just about addressing doing star reduction in Affinity Photo. So if this bit goes a bit fast, it's because there's another video for it. Right, so now I've selected all those, I'm going to expand the selection and then feather it to make it a smooth transition. So I'm going to go to Select, Grow and Shrink. Make sure circular is selected, and slider's far too sensitive, it cuts me all the time. I'm only going to expand by about 3. I'm now going to go to Select and Feather, and I'm probably going to feather this by about 5. Again, if you want to know where I'm getting these numbers from or more details about it, there's a video all about star reduction in Affinity Photo. I'm now going to go to Filters, Blur, and Minimum Blur. And we'll do a radius about 1.5, maybe 1, 1.2. That's before, and that is after. So it helps pop the image out a bit more. Makes the stars take a bit of a backseat. If you want to do these big stars, if you want them to be smaller, you can run the filter again, but only then make the tolerance to a point where it only selects the brightest stars in the image, and then run the filter again. And from here, we're basically done. I'm going to do one more thing. I'm just going to make another visible layer. If you want to adjust the colors in your image, you can now do another curves adjustment, for example. So I'm going to make a curves adjustment. And I want to darken the background sky. So I'm going to select Picker, and I'm going to click the background sky, and I'm going to drag that down. See how it's pointed this out? I now want to raise this nebulosity. I'm going to click there. I'm just going to pull that up. So it just lets you place points exactly where you want to adjust. And again, like I say, if you want to now do some funky color toning, you could go into your RGB channels with the curves, for example, or you could go and make a vibrance adjustment layer. If you want to create a bit of vibrance and a bit of saturation, be very careful with saturation. It's very strong. Less is more. Very subtle. Just going to stamp another layer here. Use the keyboard shortcut, Alt, Control, Shift, and E. And I'm going to do one more sharpening pass on the nebulosity now. So I'm going to call this Nebula Sharpen. I'm also going to duplicate this layer, just like I did with the other one, with the star reduction. Now with the Nebula Sharpen, I'm going to call this HP because we're going to put a high pass on this. Go to Filters, and Sharpen, High Pass. I want to raise the radius until just until I start seeing the nebula appear. That will have to do. I will now change this to soft light. So this is a way of sharpening this image. There you go. Since this has affected the entire image, I'm going to make a mask. So I'm just going to deselect the HP layer and go back to the normal layer and go through select sample color. And just like we did earlier, just going to select that, feather it, just so it's showing the places I want to do it. So I'm just going to feather it too. With this selection selected, normally I should have made this mask earlier, to be honest. I'll go back to the HP layer and press mask layer. And now, because we have a mask of this nebulosity, the high pass is only going to affect the nebulosity, as you can see, as you switch it on and off. And it's not going to affect the background sky. If you want to increase this effect, just duplicate the layer. And there you go. Final touches. I'm just going to stamp this visible. Delete my work. And I'm just going to rotate. This isn't the framing I had in mind. So I'm just going to go to Document. Is it Document? Yeah, Document. And rotate clockwise and rotate clockwise. That is the image I had in my mind when I shot it. The rotation of this orientation. So that is editing a nebula in Affinity Photo. We've learned a lot. This is a very in-depth tutorial, I understand. Possibly. I feel like it was in-depth. So there's a lot to digest. You may need to watch this video a couple of more times or something. There will eventually be a write-up on my website, link in the description below as well. But we've covered levels, curves, adjustment layers, star reduction, vibrance, sharpening, cropping, masking, isolating edits, and noise reduction. So, whilst there was a lot to digest, I hope this has been very informative for you, and now you can go ahead with your own images as well and apply what you've learned to those. And if you have edited this photo and you're going to share it on your social medias, please tag me in it. I love seeing the work you lot get up to with this data. You're all so talented, it's great seeing it. So please tag me in it, and I hope you've learned something. Thanks very much for watching, everybody. Clear skies. Keep looking up and keep them cameras clicking. I'll see you later.